Good afternoon.
Hey, afternoon.
Just super unrelated a question. What made you decided to study the history field?
I always had an interest in history, even growing up. Um, and I went to a vocational high school, where you learn different trades. And my focus was drafting. I was going to be a historian for the longest time. But I decided my senior year of high school that I wanted to pursue a career in history more than a career in architecture. So what I've ended up doing now is sort of combining the two. And so that's why my primary focus is architectural history and historic preservation. But yeah, it's pretty much just always been a lifelong interest.
Interesting.
No.
Okay, everybody, good afternoon. How's everybody doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
All
I'm
right.
good. You had the exam on, it was due by Sunday, and I see that everyone has completed that. That's good. I won't ask too much about that, but overall, how did the process of the exam go for everybody?
I realized at the very end, after I had already submitted my thing, that we were supposed to put in the time that we worked on it for. Should I just email that to you instead?
Yeah, that's fine, Alexandra. That's great.
I have a really quick question about the exam.
Yes.
When I took my exam, it said I needed to do 6 terms and define them, but on the study guide it said 5. I
Yeah,
did 6
and
just to be safe.
same. And
let's-
also, one of the questions that was on there, like for the short essay question, was not on the study guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
So when I went in and changed, I went in and fixed that, but I think there were about 10 students who had the exam before I fixed the 5 instead of 6, and also who had also the wrong question. So basically what we can do is we can sort of decide if you answered the question that was not on the study guide and you didn't do well, we can talk about something. But if you chose one that was on the study guide, then I think that should be fine. And then I think the rest of the students should have had the correct exam with no mistakes. That was up soon afterwards. So if you have, so look at think about the exam. If you chose to do the question that was not on the study guide, and you feel like you did that question and you didn't do very well on that question, let me know, and then we will figure something out on that. So those were the good points to raise. Other questions about the exam?
So how would my grading be affected because I did 6 terms instead of 5? Are you just gonna ignore the last one?
So I'm trying to see who's speaking because it's not showing.
Caitlin Foster.
Caitlin, yeah, it's okay. The issue for you, I think, would be that if the time that it takes to do an extra question would take away from your essays. So I will grade your exam, and I will, if I will grade it, I will grade the exam out of 100. But if I see that your essays may have suffered because you spent too much time on this extra ID that I didn't take off in time, then I will adjust your grade accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So good. Other questions?
So I put bullet points for all the things in the exam before doing any writing, and I thought I should do the long exam first, just because I felt like I could do it the quickest, and then I didn't end up being able to change any of my bullet points into sentences. And how does that affect how I'll be graded?
So, and I'm still not seeing speaker view. So just who's speaking now, just so I know?
It's Carrie.
Okay. That's a good question. So I think, doing IDs as bullet points, it can be hard to get all the information in if you're not writing full sentences. So that's one thing that I foresee that you will have not had the full information present that you would have liked to put in. Let's see, so you have enough time. So I think 2 hours is usually enough time, but sometimes students need more time. So this might be an issue for you and I to discuss separately via email, and we can discuss how we can handle this situation, and then how we can go about sort of making sure that on the final, which is a ways off, we don't have the same issue. So we'll
Okay,
find some.
thank you.
We'll have a conversation, I think, via email. We can talk about that, Carrie.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. We have finished grading all of the essay ones, and I believe that Devin did his directly in, turn it in, and so you should be able, I think, either now or very soon to see not only your grade, but also your essays. I graded the essays that I graded, the first 20, you know, on Words. I'm going to have to email them to you directly. So I'll do that probably tomorrow. And you can see some of the points that we made there. One of the things that we noticed was that some of the sort of the key directions that we try and instill in students were not always followed, and so we want to make sure that you understand what we're looking for. So I'm going to record like a little mini lecture about writing and about organization and evidence, just so that you'll have a template to work from when you work on your next essay, which is it's a ways out also, but so you'll be able sort of just to sort of structure your essay in a way that we are looking for, and to know how to incorporate the readings that you're doing. The next essay will be about Barefoot Again, and you have hopefully all gotten that book, or you're on the way to getting that book. And so I'll be talking about how you can use this source to write your essay, but also how you can use the Gordon textbook and the lectures to do that as well. So look for that. I will email you when that's up. And there'll be a new syllabus that will also reflect a change. The Friday before the essay is due, you're going to be working on essays together with Devin in your discussions, not working on what I have on the syllabus right now. So again, look for that. It'll be up there soon. That will be our effort to sort of try and help those of you who are not quite where I think you wanted to be on the essay to do better on your essay on the next essay. So so I asked you for today to watch a recorded lecture, just part of it, and to think about that for today's class. We're kind of changing gears now, right? The first part of the class, the last unit was about the new Meiji state coming into being, about the sacrifices that people had to make, sometimes not of their own volition, for the state to be born. And so now the Meiji government is in full swing, talked about some of the ideologies that are at work. And we have now, we discussed this sort of modern imperial Japan. And so now we're looking at this new phase of Japan actually going from having just a monarch who is an emperor in name to actually being an empire. And so I want to go over a few of the things from the lecture that I had you watch, and then also add to that some more. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about Korea in more depth. Korea, the colonized country in Japan's empire. And then that way for Friday, I've asked you to read a couple of things that are on Moodle. And I'd like for you to come to your discussions ready to debate in favor and also against, so both sides of an argument, of the sort of benefits of Japanese colonization of Korea. And then when you get just your sections, Devin will assign you to a group, and that group that you're in will debate for or against the proposition that I put on the syllabus. So to get ready for that, I want to talk about imperialism a little bit today. So I go to, let's see.
I do have a question before we start.
Questions? Yes,
Yes.
Alexandra.
At any point, are we going to be learning about Japan's colonization of Okinawa?
Actually, so that was partially in the lecture that I asked you to watch for today. I'm going to talk about
more
it some more right now. Yeah, okay. So a little bit.
Right. Yeah, that's something I find really fascinating, and it doesn't really get taught. So I was hoping that we would talk about it more than just what was in the lecture.
Yeah, well, I can try. It is one of those topics that gets pushed to the side because Japan's empire in Manchuria and in Korea get more attention, but Hokkaido and Okinawa are also part of Japan's imperial project. So this is, I think, a good way to jump into the lecture and talk about that, Alexandra. So I'm going to do a screen share. If you're able to put your cameras on, that would be great, so I can see that everyone's listening. If not, that's okay. I'm going to do a screen share and pull up the PowerPoint. Okay. So because we have had, because I've given the other lecture sort of that you can access online, I'm going to take today a little bit slower so we can talk about some of the things that I'm going to touch on today. So if you have questions, and today, especially today, please raise your hand and let me know. Raise your hand virtually with a little icon, or raise your actual hand, I'll try and see you. So the big story of Japan's modernization is not just that it becomes an industrialized, developed, wealthy nation with a strong military, it also becomes an empire. And by 1942, Japan has an empire that spans over all of the red on this map here. And the pink is an informal empire, but that is still very much part of Japan's empire. So the road to the empire begins well before the modern period. And in the lecture that I had you watch, I talked a bit about, again, some of these kinds of ties that Japan had to East Asia, to future colonies even before the modern period. I talked a bit about the missions of the Ryukyu embassies, which is the former Okinawa. And I also talked a bit about the Stowe family in Tsushima, in between, sort of going between Busan and Korea and Japan. And so this is sort of precursors were there before. And we also discussed that Hideyoshi tried twice to invade Korea. So there are these connections that are in place, but the modern period really sees all this change dramatically. And part of what leads to this change is I guess one of the important theories about imperialism that has been elaborated and described by Lenin, but by others as well, is that it's a sort of a safety valve for countries when they need to, as they become more capitalist, as they need to expand, as they need to satisfy a population that's perhaps over extended in terms of the resources of that location. And so Japan really is a textbook example of this kind of a need to deal with internal problems by looking outwards for more space, more labor, more resources. So in the case of the Meiji government, the first few years, as we talked about, there was a war, there's some instability, there's a lot of change, but the biggest change perhaps is that which sees the samurai class declassed, right? They lose their status, they lose their weapons, they lose their salaries, and this is really a big deal. And one of the crazy parts of this is that the people who are behind this are also themselves samurai, right? The samurai from Satsuma, the samurai from Shoshu and Tosa, and some also coming from Hizen, but they're coming from, and also from Mito. They're part of this great overturning of Japanese political and economic structures, right? And while the samurai class as a whole may have sort of supported a lot of these moves because they saw for themselves more opportunity. By 1873-74, a lot of the samurai class is already sort of disgruntled. They're realizing that they're going to lose everything, and they've lost a lot already. So one of the big issues is the samurai are no longer the military of Japan, and they're no longer employed, and they're not sure what to do. And so this is part of what actually leads the first sort of forays into imperialism for Japan. The samurai, especially in Satsuma, which helped so much to create this new country, acting as sort of joining forces with Choshu to act as a partial founder of the new imperial army, and to instill order in this new country, to go and punish, as you read about, Aizu and other domains as well who were trying to resist, but Aizu in particular. So they were disappointed when they got very little back from this process. They were worried that they had sort of perhaps unleashed an unstoppable trend that was going to erase the samurai class, and that's what happens, really. The figure Sakata Takamori is the most important in today's story. So as you may recall, Sakata Takamori was a figure who was quite, he was one of the leaders of the Imperial Army. He worked very closely with advisors and the emperor to craft these first couple years of strategy and then policy during the Meiji Restoration. But he is very concerned that, in fact, the samurai class, that these steps are going to go too far. And he has sort of a falling out with the Choshu members of the government, who are overly in favor of Westernization and overly in favor of the samurai class perhaps being gone totally. And so as these steps take place, he becomes more and more concerned, and those he represents back in Satsuma share his concerns and also tell them that that they would like him to sort of take their concerns forward. So he has an idea. His idea is that perhaps Japan could use its great wealth of skilled fighters of the samurai class by provoking a war with Korea. And this is sort of an interesting proposition that he makes. And he tries to convince leaders of the new government from Choshu. He tries to convince Yamagata Aritomo, who is from Choshu, and he tries to convince Ito Hirobumi, but they're not convinced. And his idea was basically that, in similar that the US and other countries tried to force their way into Japan, Japan could force its way into Korea by basically provoking a war with Korea and then punishing Korea for responding to this war. So he wants to use this very Western tactic of gunboat imperialism to open Korea and to also sort of occupy his dissatisfied fellow Satsuma samurai. But he's turned down. They reject the plan in the Council of State. And this is the point in 73 where Saigo Takamori resigns. And he actually leaves the government. He goes back to Kagoshima. He sort of becomes a cult figure, a hero in Satsuma. He opens a school for military arts, and the samurai who have been watching their country sort of taking itself apart and are concerned about their place in the new structure, they really rallied to him from all over, actually, Kyushu. And so Kyushu becomes sort of like the hot point for the country, and they even are trying to talk about secession, perhaps. There is a the government realizes this. They're aware that this is not going to end well, because these are indeed very well-known samurai warriors in Satsuma. And so they sort of throw him a bone. They say, okay, well, how about this? So Saigo Tsugibishi, who is the brother of Takamori, is allowed to go on a different kind of mission. So what happened here, and this is tying into your questions, I think, that you mentioned before, Alexandra, of how do we get to Okinawa and all this? It sort of begins with Japan claiming Okinawa through a very strange series of events. So in 1873, there was some shipwrecked Okinawans landed in Taiwan, and they were attacked, and some of them were killed. by Taiwanese Aboriginals. So the government, wanting sort of to try and expand Japan's sphere of influence and also to satisfy the dissatisfied samurai class, authorizes an expedition for the Satsuma samurai to go and punish the Taiwanese for this act of violence against what they called at this point Japan's protected Ryukyuan peoples. So they do go to Taiwan. They do attack Taiwan, the Japanese military force, and they succeed. And then in doing so, they're able to claim to the Chinese and also Western powers that the Ryukyu Islands are part of Japan. So it really is a very purposeful act. And in doing so, this is very successful. And when they come back to Kagoshima and into the Satsuma domain, they begin to negotiate with the with the Ryukyuan kingdom to officially make them part of Japan. It takes a couple of years, but eventually they very forcefully convince the king of the Ryukyu kingdom, Shotai, to abdicate. But they're able to offer him in exchange, thanks to their ties to Meiji leaders, the opportunity to become part of the new nobility that has been created to satisfy sort of the elite samurai who are no longer going to be able to be samurai. So he becomes a noble, a part of the court of the nobility. He gets a title. He becomes a baron, and then he also loses his power over his home country, and he gets to make one trip back home to say goodbye. And so this is Japan's first direct sort of imperialist action, and it sort of, I think, demonstrates the way that Japan is going to carry forth in its diplomacy in the years to come. So, not sure why that's back there, but this was not enough for the Satsuma domain. Their troubles, the changes keep happening, and the last of the changes in '76 is when the samurai have to, they have to cut off the top knots and everything. It sort of is the end of the samurai class. This 6-year process comes to an end, and at this point, Takamori has tried again and again to communicate with the government that this is not okay, and that Satsuma is boiling over with anger and frustration at the situation, and so with no choice really left, Takamori leads his students and others from all over Kyushu who are unhappy, dissatisfied. Because I mean, you have to sort of picture them, right? They didn't fight with Tokugawa Ieyasu, so they were given this status as Tozama or outside daimyo, and they had to sort of stay in their corner of Japan in Satsuma, and they were not allowed to be in the government at all. And then here comes a new chance. They change sides, support the imperial movement and the new emperor, and again they're still being left out of things, and what they want to happen is not happening. So the frustration really comes to a boiling point, and Saigo Takamori leads 4,000 troops. He marches towards the capital from Kagoshima. The imperial troops meet the army of the Satsuma-led army in Kumamoto, and there are a couple of big battles, but they actually, at Kumamoto, they actually are victorious, and then they keep marching to Shiroyama, which is not very far away from Kumamoto. And here is where the famous battle between these sad, forgotten samurai and the new imperial army takes place. If you've ever watched, The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, it's a pretty good flick, right? There you see the picture of the Gatling gun. They're firing machine gun rounds on the samurai from Satsuma who are trying to approach with bow and arrow and swords, and that's that's not accurate, right? They all had weapons, but the Imperial Army did have better weapons, and they also had just a much better military organizational structure, and they were able to defeat very handily the forces of the samurai, and the numbers were the numbers that should have been in favor of Saito Takamori were not enough to help them to win. So this is sort of the last hurrah of the samurai, and it comes to an end. But we have already planted the seeds of Japanese imperialism. And this is the Battle of Shibayama, as they're pushed back to towards Kagoshima. So anyway, I also mentioned another of Japan's imperial endeavors, and this is the Ainu. And I want to go back to this slide that is in the video that I posted. So the Ainu are a people who lived up in Hokkaido, and also the area. We actually go back here. So up in Hokkaido, but also up here in the Sakhalin Island up here, this part of the world up here. They are not Japanese, and they, sort of ethnically speaking, and they have a different language, and have a different religion and different cultures, very different people. From the 1600s, the Japanese had been, as we discussed a few classes ago, trading with the Ainu, but also encroaching more and more on Ainu land. That process was accelerated with the shogunate's granting of the Matsumae family and the domain that's closest to Hokkaido the right to trade with the Ainu and to settle also in Ainu lands. So over the course of about 2 centuries, from 1650 to 1850, the Japanese are going to be settling in and taking over farmland and making farmland in Ainu land. And they're also going to be fishing quite a bit. And I mentioned in the PowerPoint that I posted that the Japanese were very conscious about trying to fish better than the Ainu, and they were successful at doing that. And between the gill net, which you see here, and the pound net, which is here, a pound trap, I should say, which drives fish in, they were really able to just enormously deplete the fishing supplies, the fishing resources of the Ainu. And so these things precede, in fact, colonization. But colonization comes in 1869. The new government announces that this territory is part of Japan called Hokkaido, and they've actually created a whole using sort of the American West blueprint and the U.S. government's efforts to sort of tame the West. They use that blueprint, and they want to make Hokkaido the western frontier of Japan, although it's really more in the northeast. And so they announced this policy. They have a whole think tank that's dedicated to trying to accomplish this. And they set about announcing that it's part of Japan and then dividing the land up. And as I mentioned in the PowerPoint that you hopefully had a chance to watch, they also impose land division and land title necessity, so that if you want to have property and you're Ainu, you have to actually show that you own the property. And because the Ainu at this point, many of them are not interested in speaking Japanese, many of them are also having to move and be migratory or nomadic because they've lost access to fishing rights and resources. They lack the kinds of documentation necessary to prove their ownership. And so they essentially are being replaced by Japanese who are actually doing this protocol correctly. So it goes very badly for the Ainu. And they are, as a people, treated very badly in this whole scenario. And it's one of the areas that today we're still studying quite a bit about to learn see the parallels between the U.S., the American West, and this Japan's sort of second colony of Hokkaido. So let's skip that. The idea that Saito Takamori had of trying to sort of create a war with Korea does not work in 1873-74, but it does not go away. And his last sort of acknowledgement comes in the government's decision to go ahead and reframe this as an opening of Korea. And not to go to war, but to open Korea to trade as the West had done with Japan. So in 1876, Japanese warships approach they approach Busan, and of course, because this is as we know very well, Korea is hostile to foreigners and has tried very hard to avoid contact with that is not organized by the government of Korea with Japan. And they've also had issues with piracy. So they're really trying to avoid trade with Japan at this point, unless it's on their terms. The arrival of these gunboats on the horizon is met with cannon fire from Korea, which the Japanese return, and very quickly the Koreans surrender. And then Japan imposes upon them the Treaty of Kangwa in 1876, which is very much a carbon copy in most ways of the U.S. The American-Japanese Treaty of Amity and Friendship that the U.S. had Japan sign. And this is a picture of the signing ceremony in the Kangwa Palace in Seoul. And this officially opens Japan to foreign trade. But this time, the foreign trade is going to actually include Western countries as well, because it has a most favored nations clause. So then the U.S. will follow suit, and the British will follow suit, and so on and so forth, opening what they used to call the Hermit Kingdom to trade with the West as well. Japanese will have extraterritoriality. Japanese can settle in ports in Korea. The Busan and Incheon are going to be opened as ports for Japanese to go trade in and live in. Perhaps most importantly, Japan gets a special role of advisor to the Koreans. So this is where they begin to argue, well, we're going to help Korea to become stronger. Having a stronger Korea means a stronger Japan and a stronger sort of region in the world. And so then they are going to be able to send observers who are really going to be advisors or counselors to from Japan's court to the Korean king's court in Seoul. So from this point on, China and Japan are both sort of having a difficult time deciding what to do. Japan has made clear their intentions to uplift Korea, but China, which has acted as sort of the big brother to Korea, at least in terms of diplomacy for the past several hundred years, would like to see this sort of tie continue, and they would like to see their interests put first and foremost in Korea. So we have the sort of two different powers trying to exercise influence in Korea. In Korea as well, there is a whole sort of movement to try and modernize Korea. And Kim Ok-yoon, who you see here on the far left, is one of the individuals who sees Japan's efforts to help Korea as a good thing, and sort of embraces this possibility, the possibilities that Japan is offering. And so he actually is part of a party, the Gewapa, that actually has they are together trying to encourage Japan's intervention in Korea, and they're opposing the leadership in Korea. So Korea has a king, but the king has a regent who is actually his father-in-law. His name is called the Taewon-gun, and he's sort of anti-Western. And so the group led by Kim Ok-yoon and others is trying to sort of modernize Korea and promote a more modern Japanese modernized Korea, and to oppose this more conservative leadership that's in place. So in 1880, 85, well, there also is an effort actually during this time to even overthrow the current monarchy in Korea to facilitate Japanese control, but it doesn't work. But anyway, so China and Japan come together and they agree to try to avoid bloodshed in or about Korea. The Lee Ito Convention between Ito Hirobumi and Lee Honggang, who you see on the right. They agree that neither one of them is going to intervene directly in Korean affairs without telling the other one first. So in other words, we're both trying to help Korea, but we're going to commit to transparency as we do that. And this is the foundation for the diplomacy that Japan and China agreed to about Korea soon after its opening to the West. In 1894, this is a really long story. So Korea was going through a difficult time before Japan colonizes it, right? The gap between the elite class or the elite class in Korea is called the, it's been a long day for me. I've forgotten the name, but anyway, mostly they come from sort of a small group of scholar officials, but most of them were actually unemployed by the 1890s. And many of them have the last name Yi. They come from this sort of elite group that is not very informed about the people's well-being. Scholars write about sort of a fatalism that is common in Korea. People are sort of just resigned to living in difficult conditions. There's still a form of slavery still exists, or sort of inherited servitude. The rights of there are no sort of civil rights or anything like that. And there is also extreme poverty. And Japan's imperialism actually makes things worse initially. And so there is, in 1894, a movement to try and reassert Korean identity and to promote some sort of intrinsic Korean values in the form of a Donggak, or the Eastern Learning Movement. And this movement actually is led by some failed scholar officials, and they managed to get millions of people to follow them and work with them to work together. And it actually began in 1860, but they sort of calms down, but it becomes a national movement on a massive scale, like 94, 95. And this rebellion that is actually seeking to oppose the West and also fight the government is tremendous. And so the Korean monarchy, at this point, the king King Kodrong he's of age now. He reaches out for help, and he asks China to come and help put down this rebellion, which China, complies that they do. They come help put down the rebellion, but then in doing that, the Japanese argued that they were not informed, and so after the rebellion is put down, actually, while the rebellion is happening, Japan begins plans to challenge China to go to war. The Yangban class is what I meant to say, the Yangban class. But anyway, so the outcome of this is the Sino-Japanese War, the first Sino-Japanese War, in which enormous China loses to little Japan. We talked a bit about how China was devastated by the Opium Wars and many other problems that were plaguing the country. But to the outside world, but the Western world, China was still a very big country that, because of its manpower and organization, was not attackable. That's why all the Western countries only took small pieces of China as concessions and treaty ports. And they never tried to attack all of China. And so the fact that Japan and China had this fight was sort of unprecedented, and then that Japan won this war, which lasted less than a year, was quite a shock for the Western world. So this is important for today's class because this is another building block for Japanese imperialism. In defeating China, Japan is able to exact from the Chinese government that Korean will be an independent country, independent of foreign influence, their own included, but especially China, that Japan will get a huge indemnity, a big amount of money to pay for their damages, for their war effort and losses. But in terms of colonization, Japan will be able to open 4 treaty ports in China, which is a very big deal. And some in the foreign areas like Tianjin, but other areas as well. But most importantly, that Taiwan and this area here, this little area here called the Liaodong Peninsula, will become Japanese colonies. So we already have the Okinawa, which is the new name of the former Ryukyu Islands, and then we have Ezo, which has become Hokkaido, and now we have the Liaodong Peninsula, which is going to later on become a part of Manchuria, and we have Taiwan that are now parts of Japan as well, Japan's empire. So before 1900, Japan has already made a lot of strides towards becoming a very powerful and visible imperialist country in East Asia. So the policies that Japan puts in place in Okinawa and Hokkaido are a bit different than what comes afterwards, because these are areas that have already had a lot of Japanese cultural contact and a lot of Japanese settler presence before they are colonized, sometimes going back centuries. So, but when Japan colonizes Taiwan, this is a really big shift, right? And they really want to do a good job. As the world is watching them, the world doesn't actually care much about the Japanese colonizing Hokkaido or colonizing Okinawa, but they are watching as what used to be considered a Chinese territory, Japanese territory, how Japan goes about being an imperialist, right? And so what we see is they have a very clear model in which there's a Japanese governor general who is on the ground, the person in charge of Taiwan. They run a census, they do a cadastral, a land survey, and they create a national police force, which is composed of many Chinese Taiwanese elites, as well as Japanese police trainers who come down from Japan proper. They also create a national system for education, right, which is all done in Japanese, and which it also includes Japanese faculty for the most part, with a few Chinese Taiwanese educators in the mix. And so all these things, they create the appearance of a well-organized, well-run, well-administered colony. And behind all that, there's actually a lot of force that's in place, and some of which they are able to sort of farm out to Chinese Taiwanese as well. The Baoja system is a system of sort of mutual surveillance system of small sort of families watching each other, and they use this system, which actually was in place before, to suppress dissent. They use auxiliary police, which are actually police that are Taiwanese Chinese. And they also have quite high taxes. So all these elements, they really help to make Taiwan more Japanese and integrate it more fully into Japan's empire. If someone from, we're almost out of time, but if someone from Taiwan wants to go to school in Japan for higher education, they actually can. And this is one of the primary ways through which the role models in Japan and the ideals of Japan get sort of brought back to Taiwanese through the system. And this is all great, but another big part of the story of Taiwan is that Taiwan is going to be Japan's first so-called rice colony. They're going to use Taiwan they're going to take Taiwan's resources for Japan proper, giving very little back to Taiwan in exchange. The Bank of Taiwan is really a bank that's made to facilitate the selling at low price or no cost of resources like rice and sugar from Taiwan to the metropole. But at the same time, they also do put in roads and harbors and railroads, and they also dredge rivers and make the transportation of people and goods, as well as information through telegraph lines and postal systems possible. And so they want to facilitate their empire, but they're also in doing so making Taiwan a more connected, a more modern, and perhaps a wealthier country. So as we look towards next class, we'll focus just on Korea and its path from being an informal colony, which is really what it's become after 1895, because Japan doesn't actually leave Korea, to becoming a formal colony in 1910. So that's where we're going. Please be sure and do the readings. And it's been nice talking sort of at you all. I think we're out of time, but if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them as everyone else can go. So thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon. I will see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Devin and Professor. Did everyone leave? Crap.
Okay, so if you have questions, I'm here. Kind of trying to see.
My internet turned off at the very beginning of lecture, like 10 minutes in. So
Okay.
I got to like you mentioning the colonization of Korea, and then my internet turned off.
Well, that's okay. The lecture will be up on Moodle as a YouTube video probably tomorrow. So you can definitely check it out there, and you can see what you missed.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm sorry that happened. It's not easy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Bye.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Take care.
You as well. Bye-bye.